Nick Rahia squinted against the violet sunlight filtering through the dense canopy overhead. Even after 2 weeks, on Vera Prime, the perpetual twilight of the planet still threw off his internal clock. He checked his wrist display, 0730 local time, and quickened his pace along the crystalline path toward the Science Academy. Late on your third day stellar impression, Reyes. He muttered to himself. The towering spires of the Academy gleamed in the distance, absorbing the purple light and refracting it in mesmerizing patterns. Normally Nick would have stopped to appreciate the view. But today Lieutenant Commander Voss Harral would be assigning him his permanent post, and Varians valued punctuality above almost everything except their ridiculous social hierarchy as he approached the Academy. Gate's 2 Varian guards snapped to attention. Their violet skin seemed to shimmer beneath their silver armor, and their green vertical pupils narrowed as they assessed him. Identification, the taller one demanded, her voice melodic despite its coldness. Nick slapped his palm against the scanner with unnecessary force. Nick Reyes, Earth Exchange Program Cybernetics Division. The scanner flashed green. But the guards didn't soften their stance. You are precisely 8 minutes and 43 seconds late. Technician Reyes, the second guard said. Lieutenant Commander V. Harral has noted your tardiness, of course. He has. Nick sighed. Don't suppose you guys have coffee around here? The Tsan hangover's killing me. The guard stared at him blankly. Right, no humor, got it. Nick flashed them a salute that would have gotten him written up in any Earth military outfit and strode through the gates. Inside the Academy bustled with Varian scientists and administrators, all moving with deliberate purpose. Their silver hair was uniformly styled in elaborate braids that signified rank and discipline. A stark contrast to Nick's rumpled dark curls that he'd barely run a hand through that morning. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors by memory, finally reaching Boss Harl's office precisely 11 minutes late. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. Enter came the clip response. Lieutenant Commander Vossaro stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. Like all Varians, he towered over Nick by at least a foot. His ceremonial robe shimmered with embedded status indicators, thousands of tiny lights that broadcast his accomplishments in lineage to anyone who knew how to read them. Technician Reyes Viral didn't turn from the window. Your punctuality leaves much to be desired. Sorry, sir, still adjusting to the planetary cycle. You've had 16 days. That excuse expired approximately 15 days ago. Voss Harold finally turned, his green eyes narrowing. However, your technical credentials are exceptional, which is why, despite my reservations, I've assigned you to our most prestigious research division. Nick straightened, his interest peak. Despite himself, what division would that be? Circ Xenobiological Integration. You'll be working directly with Lady Leah, Ziva on cross-species cellular regeneration. Nick's eyebrows shot up. Ziva as in the High Council Zev Thea. The very same Lady Leah is third in succession to the family seat, and the Academy's foremost xenobiologist. V. Harrell's mouth tightened into what might have been a smile on a human. Try not to embarrass our species, no pressure. Then Nick muttered. V. Harrell tapped his wrist display. Lady Leah will meet you in Laboratory 7 in 20 minutes. Do not belate in. Technician Reyes do. Dot. He paused. Green eyes boring into Nick's. The lady. Zev Thea is not accustomed to Earth's casual demeanor. I suggest you adjust accordingly. Crystal clear. Sir, dismissed. Nick managed to keep his sarcastic salute internal this time, as he left the office, a high-ranking aristocrat, just what he needed. More Varian stiffness and protocol. He'd signed up for this exchange to work with cutting-edge tech, not to navigate alien politics. He found Laboratory 7 easily enough. It was 3 times the size of the others, with actual windows overlooking the Academy gardens. Nick paused at the entrance, straightening his uniform and running a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to tame it. The door slid open before he could knock. Inside, the lab gleamed with equipment that would make Earth's best facilities look like children's toys. Holographic displays flickered with complex molecular structures, and the air hummed with the sound of advanced computing systems. But it wasn't the technology that stopped Nick in his tracks. Lady Leazara stood at the central console, her back to the door. Even from behind, she commanded presence. Tall even for a Varian, with silver hair cascading down her back in intricate braids that spoke of her high status. When she turned, Nick struggled to maintain his professional demeanor. Her features were striking: high cheekbones, full lips, and almond-shaped eyes with vertical pupils of the most intense green he'd ever seen. almost golden in the lab's light. Her violet skin seemed to glow from within, and the formal scientific attire she wore did little to hide her graceful figure. Technician Reyes. She said, her voice cool and melodic. You're early. How unexpected given your record thus far. Nick blinked, thrown off balance. Please, spare me the Earth pleasantries. Commander Voss Harrell informed me of your unconventional approach, she gestured to a workstation. You'll be stationed there. Your access is limited to non-critical systems until you prove yourself trustworthy. Nick's momentary awe hardened into irritation. With all due respect, Lady Zev Thea, I was top of my class at MIT Luna and have 3 patents in regenerative cybernetics. I didn't come all the way to Vera Prime to be treated like an intern. Leah raised a single silver eyebrow, the only indication that his words had any impact. Impressive credentials for a human, certainly. However, on Vera Prime, trust is earned, not assumed, because of academic achievements. She turned back to her console. Today, you will familiarize yourself with our systems and review the project parameters and what exactly is this project Voss Harrell mentioned. Cross-species cellular regeneration, but was light on details. Leah tapped her console and a holographic display materialized between them, a complex molecular structure rotating slowly in the air. We're developing methods to regenerate tissue across different species. She explained, currently, most medical technology is species-specific. A skin regenerator designed for Varians would be useless, possibly harmful for humans. We seek to change that. Despite his annoyance, Nick was intrigued. Universal regeneration tech. That's actually pretty revolutionary indeed. Was that a hint of pride in her voice? The applications would be extensive, particularly in frontier colonies with mixed species populations. Nick studied the molecular structure. This is a hormone-based approach. Correct, we're focusing on triggering natural regeneration processes rather than synthetic replacements. Nick moved closer to the display, forgetting his irritation as his scientific curiosity took over smart-less rejection issues. But you'd need a unival cellular receptor that doesn't currently exist in any known species. Leah's eyes widened slightly. The Varian equivalent of shock. That's precisely our current obstacle. Mind if I take a look at your current formula for a moment? Leah seemed to hesitate, then nodded. Your perspective may be valuable. Over the next few hours. Nick lost himself in the work. Despite her cold demeanor, Leah was brilliant, and their scientific discussion flowed more easily than he'd expected. By mid-afternoon, he'd identified several potential modifications to their approach. If we adjust the molecular binding here, he said, manipulating the holographic structure, we could create a receiver that mimics aspects of both human in Varian cellular structures. Laria leaned closer, her silver hair brushing against his shoulder as she studied his modifications. Nick caught a subtle scent. Something like cinnamon and ozone, and found himself momentarily distracted. Interesting approach, she admitted. Unorthodox, but potentially viable. That's me. Unorthodox, but viable. Nick quipped with a grin. The corner of Leah's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough that Nick counted it as a victory. You may begin synthesizing a prototype tomorrow, she said, stepping back. For now, it's late. The first meal, rotation has already begun in the communal hall. Nick glanced at his display. They'd work straight through lunch, thanks, but I think I'll pass on the Varian cuisine tonight. Last time I tried it, my tongue went numb for 3 hours. This time, Leah's lips definitely quirked upward. You were served traditional carrots, considered impolite not to finish it, despite the neurotoxins. Neurotoxins you people eat? Neurotoxins for fun in carefully regulated amounts. They produce pleasant sensations for Ian. I forgot humans lack the necessary enzymes to process them properly. Nick stared at her. Was that a joke? Ladies of Thea. Her expression immediately returned to its neutral state, simply an observation. Good evening, technician. Reyes, over the next 2 weeks a routine developed. Nick would arrive at the lab each morning, increasingly on time, and they would work together on the regeneration formula despite their different approaches. Nick preferring intuitive leaps while Leah methodically worked through each possibility. They made surprising progress. Nick also made it his personal mission to crack through Leah's icy exterior. He'd drop casual jokes, share stories about Earth, and occasionally ask questions about Varian culture. At first, she responded with minimal courtesy, but gradually her responses grew longer and sometimes he caught a flash of genuine interest in those striking eyes. "So let me get this straight," Nick said one afternoon as they worked side by side. "You've never had ice cream, not once in your life." "Varians do not typically consume frozen dairy products," Luria replied, not looking up from her console. "That's criminal, seriously. I'm going to have to file a complaint with the High Council." Nick shook his head in mock dismay. "What about movies? Please tell me you've at least watched a movie." Luria paused her work. "We have cultural narratives, yes, not the same thing. Movie night. It's happening. I smuggled in some classics from Earth that would be inappropriate," Lara said, but Nick caught the slight dilation of her pupil's interest despite her denial. "Science demands exploration, ladies of Thea. Consider it cultural research by the third week." Their prototype elixir was taking shape. Nick had developed a formula that theoretically could stimulate targeted tissue growth in both human and Varian physiology. Though it remained untested, the simulation results are promising, Elle acknowledged, reviewing the data. "Though I noticed the effects are significantly stronger on mammalian tissues." "Makes sense, it's using modified human growth hormones as a base." Nick explained, "We can adjust the ratios if needed." "When will it be ready for preliminary testing?" "I should have a stable sample by tomorrow the next day." Nick arrived at the lab with the completed prototype, a small vial of iridescent blue liquid. He placed it in a secured container labeled Prototype Jugshevin. Human use only in both English and Varian script. "Finally finished it?" Lee asked, approaching his workstation. "Yep. Next step would be controlled testing, but we need approval from the ethics committee first." Before Lara could respond, V. Harold's voice came over the intercom. "Lady Zara, Technician Reyes, your preside is required at tonight's diplomatic reception. The Terran ambassador wishes to review your progress." Nick groaned. Great politics. It's a necessary part of securing continued funding. Leah reminded him the reception begins in 2 hours. "I suggest you find more appropriate attire." "What's wrong with my uniform?" Leah's eyes traveled over him in a way that made Nick suddenly self-conscious. "It lacks formality." The diplomatic reception was held in the Academy's Grand Hall, a soaring space with crystal chandeliers that refracted the light into patterns mimicking Vera's constellations. Nick had managed to locate a formal tan diplomatic uniform slightly too tight across the shoulders, but better than nothing. He spotted Elaria. Immediately, she stood among a group of Varian officials wearing formal attire that accentuated her tall, graceful form far more than her lab clothes ever had. The silver blue fabric shimmered with embedded status lights, and her hair was arranged in an even more elaborate series of braids that framed her face perfectly. Nick grabbed a drink from a passing server and made his way toward her. As he approached, he noticed how the other Varans deferred to her, their posture stiffening in respect. "Lady Zathea," he greeted with a slight bow, remembering his cultural training. "You look different outside the lab." Leah turned, and for a moment Nick thought he saw a flash of relief in her eyes. "Technician Reyes, your attire is adequate." "High praise indeed." He laughed. "How long do we have to stay at this thing?" "Until the ambassador has been properly respected," she replied. Then lowered her voice, "Approximately 2 hours if precedent holds well. At least there's drinks." Nick raised his glass only to pause when he noticed a similar vial in Laria's hand. The contents looked oddly familiar. Iridescent blue, just like his eyes widened. In horror, Leah waited, but she had already raised the vial to her lips and consumed the contents in one elegant swallow. Nick froze, his mind racing. That couldn't be his prototype. He'd left it secured in the lab, properly labeled. "Is something wrong?" Leah asked, noting his expression. "That drink, what was it?" "The traditional ceremonial beverage. All participants must consume it to signal good faith in negotiations." She tilted her head. "Why do you ask?" Nick forced a smile. "No reason, just curious about Varian customs." He spent the next hour in anxious observation, watching Luria for any signs of distress or reaction. But she continued her diplomatic duties flawlessly, showing no indication that anything was amiss by the time he escorted her back to the laboratory to retrieve her personalitums. Nick had almost convinced himself that it wasn't his elix she had consumed. Our progress impressed the ambassador, Leah noted as they entered the lab. Full funding for the next research cycle is virtually assured. Great news, Nick replied distractedly, making a beeline for his workstation. The secured container was exactly where he left it, but empty. His stomach dropped. Laria. Did you move my prototype number? Why would I? She stopped. Mid-sentence. Sudden understanding, crossing her features the ceremonial beverage. Yeah, I think you might have just consumed an experimental human growth hormone. Elixir. Leah's normally composed face showed genuine alarm. That's impossible. The servers would never. Someone must have mixed them up, maybe thought it was meant for the ceremony. Nick ran a hand through his hair, but look, it's designed for human physiology. Your Varan biology should neutralize most of the effects. Leah nodded slowly, visibly regaining her composure. Yes, Varian. Cellular structures are fundamentally different from human ones. The probability of cross-species reactivity is minimal, exactly. And even if there is some reaction, the formula is designed to stimulate natural healing and growth processes, not create new ones. Then logically there is no cause for concern. Laria straightened her shoulders. We will monitor the situation, but I see no reason for alarm. Nick wasn't entirely convinced, but her logical approach calmed his anxiety. Right, and first thing. Tomorrow. We'll run some tests to make sure everything's normal, agreed. Good night, Technician Reyes. Night, Leah, and call me if you notice anything unusual. Okay, she nodded and departed with her usual grace, leaving Nick staring anxiously at the empty container. The next morning, Nick arrived at the lab early, determined to develop some kind of counter-agent, just in case he was deep in molecular modeling. When the lab door slid open with unusual force, Laria stood in the doorway, but not with her usual composed posture. Her breath came in short gasps, her normally perfect hair slightly disheveled, and her formal attire appeared hastily assembled. Most shocking of all was her expression, wide-eyed and flustered in a way he'd never seen on any Varian. Leah, what's wrong? She closed the door behind her and leaned against it. Your elixir, she whispered, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. It had an effect? Nick approached cautiously. What kind of effect? Leah's violet skin darkened across her cheeks. Aryan blush. My anatomical proportions have altered overnight. Altered how? Nick asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. Instead of answering, Laria gestured to her chest area, which Nick now noted seemed significantly more prominent than before. The formal attire she typically wore with ease now strained noticeably across her upper body. Oh, was all he could manage. This is unprecedented, Laria said, her voice rising slightly. Varian females do not possess such excessive mammary development. It's inappropriate, unseemly, and she stopped abruptly, wincing as she shifted position and what Nick prompted. And they are extremely sensitive. She admitted, her flush deepening to a rich purple. Every movement causes sensations. Nick tried and failed to keep his eyes at face level. I'm sorry, I never thought you must fix this immediately, Laria interrupted before anyone discovers what has happened. I'll try, but I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with, Nick said, slipping into professional mode. Despite the bizarre situation, we should run some tests. Lia's eyes widened with genuine alarm. Number. No tests, no records no one can know about. This especially not. The lab door slid open, revealing an elderly Varian male in formal council robes. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. Leah's disheveled appearance and Nick standing unusually close to her uncle Thalor. Leah gasped, immediately straightening and clasping her hands formally before her, a motion that obviously caused her discomfort. Given her new sensitivity, Lady Zethia, the elder acknowledged coldly, before turning his severe gaze to Nick, and this must be the human technician. I've heard so much about Nick Ray. Is Sir Nick offered his hand before remembering that Varians, especially high-ranking ones, rarely engaged in physical contact with outsiders. Thor ignored the gesture. He came to personally review your research progress, niece. The High Council is most interested in your collaboration. Of course, Uncle Laria said, her professional mask slipping back into place despite her physical discomfort. Though we were just about to What has happened to your appearance? Thor interrupted, his gaze fixed on Leah's noticeably altered silhouette. Loria froze, her composure cracking. There was an accident, Nick interjected with one of our experimental formulas. Thor's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. You experimented on a member of the High Council lineage. No, it was my fault. Leah said quickly. I accidentally consumed silence, the Lord commanded. Do you realize what this means? Under Varian law, human section 42 of the ancient code is explicit. Any outsider who physically alters a noble woman's body becomes permanently responsible for her. Nick blinked. Wait. What responsible? How, uncle, that law is archaic and hasn't been invoked? In generations, Lurie protested, a note of panic in her voice. It has never been removed from the code, the Lord countered. And in this case, its application seems most appropriate. His thin lips curved in what might have been satisfaction. Congratulations. Technician Reyes, according to our most sacred laws, you're now culturally bound to Lady Leah Zara as her protector and partner. Nick echoed. You mean like in your Earth terminology? I believe fiancé would be the closest approximation, Tor said. Coldly, the High Council will be most interested to hear of this development. He turned and left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving Nick and Lara staring at each other in stunned silence. Did he just say we're engaged? Nick finally managed. Leah Sanquinto, a chair wincing as her new sensity made itself known again. This is a diplomatic disaster, she whispered. My family, the council. The entire research program, hang on, Nick said. Trying to process. There must be some way around. This we just need to reverse. The effects of the elixir, and if we cannot, Lori looked up at him, her green eyes showing vulnerability he'd never seen before. What then, Technician Reyes? Nick ran a hand through his hair, the full implications of their situation sinking in. Then I guess we're going to find out just how good I am at being a Varian fiancé, as if on cue. Leia's communicator chimed with multiple incoming messages. The news was already spreading through the academy. She looked down at her altered body, then back at Nick, a mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and something else flickering across her features. I believe the humans have an expression for situations like this, she said, with uncharacteristic dryness. Yeah, Nick agreed. We are completely, utterly screwed. Nick leaned against the lab counter, watching as Lara paced back and forth, her communicator continuing to chime. With incoming messages each time she moved, he couldn't help but notice how her newly enhanced assets shifted beneath her formal attire. He quickly averted his eyes, but not quickly enough. Damn, those Varian robes are really working overtime now. He thought, a mixture of guilt and undeniable masculine appreciation coursing through him. Stop looking at them, Loria snapped, crossing her arms defensively over her chest, then immediately wincing at the contact. I wasn't. Nick started, then shrugged with a half grin. Okay, maybe I was. Sue me, I'm only human. This is not amusing, Technician Reyes. Leah's cheeks flushed that fascinating shade of deep purple again. The High Council will convene an emergency session by this evening. Nick pushed himself away from the counter and approached her. Look, we need to tackle this systematically. First, let's work on an antidote. Second, we find a way around this ridiculous ancient law. And third, we figure out how to deal with your uncle, who clearly has it out for both of us. Leah's eyes narrowed. Thor is second chair of the High Council. His influence is considerable. Yeah, I got that impression from his warm and fuzzy personality. Nick ran a hand through his hair. What's his problem with humans anyway? He led the opposition to the human-Varian exchange program from the beginning. Leah explained, he believes Vera should maintain its isolation and cultural purity. Great, so I just accidentally handed him the perfect excuse to shut down the entire program. Nick grabbed a datapad and started scanning through molecular formulas. No pressure. Leah's communicator chimed again, and she checked the message with visible dread. It's worse than that. The council has appointed a cultural aide to monitor Zor, another one of your cheery relatives. Zor is Loria? Hesitated. He served as my childhood instructor in the family disciplines. He is rigidly traditional, even by Varian standards. Fantastic. Nick scrolled through more formulas. When do we meet? This paragon of Varian virtue. As if on cue, the lab door slid open, a tall skeletal Varian male, and Ed, his silver hair pulled back in severe braids that emphasized his sharp features and cold green eyes, unlike the flowing robes most Varians preferred. He wore a high-collared formal suit that reminded Nick of historical pictures of Earth military dictators. "Lady Ziva," he intoned, his gaze deliberately avoiding her. "Altered figure, I see reports of your condition were not exaggerated." Instructor Zor Loria acknowledged her, her posture automatically straightening into rigid formality despite her discomfort. "The High Council honors me with your attention." Thor's attention shifted to Nick, his vertical pupils contracting thin slits, "and this is the human responsible." Nick extended his hand with deliberate casualness. "Nick Reyes, pleasure to meet you." "Zor, I'd say great things about you, but Leah hasn't had time to share all your wonderful qualities." Yet Zor ignored the outstretched hand. "You will address me as Cultural Atis Zor." "Human, sure thing." "Cultural Atis Zor, human, or wait, is human part of your name or mine?" "The syntax is a little confusing," Leah shot Nick a warning glance which he pretended not to notice. He wasn't about to kowtow to this walking icicle. "The High Council has instructed me to monitor this situation until a resolution is reached." Zor continued, ignoring Nick's comment. "You will continue your research while maintaining the appropriate public appearance required by Section 42. And what exactly does appropriate public appearance entail?" Nick asked, crossing his arms. "You will attend all diplomatic and social functions as Lady Zia's formal consort. You will observe proper Varian etiquette at all times, and you will refrain from any behavior that might bring further embarrassment to the Zev Thera lineage. So basically act like I've got a steel rod up my—" "We understand the requirements," Lariah interrupted hastily. "We will comply while seeking a resolution to the physical alterations." Thor's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. "See that you do. The Council has granted you 2 weeks to reverse the effects. After that time, more permanent measures will be considered." After Zor departed, Nick let out a long whistle. Charming guy, was he born with that personality? Or did he have to work at it? "Zor believes in absolute adherence to tradition," Leah said, sinking into a chair, "and he has never approved of my scientific career. Let me guess, he thinks noble ladies should stick to arranging flowers and planning dinner parties, essentially." "Yes." Leah winced as she shifted position. These sensations are distracting. Nick's mind immediately conjured images he shouldn't be having about his research partner, but he couldn't den the spark of masculine satisfaction at seeing the normally composed Varian thrown off balance. There was something undeniably attractive about watching her prim exterior crack to reveal glimpses of genuine emotion. "Focus, Reyes," he chided himself. "Ogling your accidental alien fiancé isn't going to solve this problem." But another part of him, the part that had always appreciated beautiful women, regardless of species, wasn't entirely sorry about their predicament. If he had to be culturally bound to someone he could do a lot worse than the brilliant, gorgeous Varian scientist who'd been starring in his private thoughts since day one. "Let's get to work on that antidote," he said, forcing his mind back to science, "and maybe see about getting you some more accommodating clothes in the meantime." Over the next few days, Nick and Laria fell into a new routine in the lab. They worked frantically on developing an antidote, running simulation after simulation, to find a compound that would reverse the effects without causing additional problems after hours. They were forced to attend a series of diplomatic functions as Vera's most talked about engaged couple. The first such event was a diplomatic dinner hosted by the Earth ambassador. Nick arrived at Leah's quarters to escort her as tradition, apparently demanded, only to fend her envy visible distress. "I cannot attend," she declared the moment her door slid open. Nick stepped inside, letting the door close behind him. "What's wrong? This is wrong." She gestured to her formal attire, a silver blue gown that had clearly been altered in haste to accommodate her new proportions. The result was less than subtle, drawing attention to precisely what she wanted to hide. "I look beautiful," Nick finished, honestly. Leah's head snapped up, her eyes widening. "That is not the appropriate response." "Maybe not the appropriate Varan response," Nick countered with a crooked smile. "But it's the honest human one." A flush spread across her cheeks and she turned away. "Your species' preoccupation with physical attributes is incomprehensible," says the woman whose people engineered themselves to be 7 feet tall with perfect violet skin and silver hair. Nick teased, face it. Lariavarians are just as vain as humans, you're just more repressed about it. I am not repressed, she protested. I am disciplined. Uh-huh. Nick stepped closer. Then why are you blushing right now? I am not Lyria. Touched her cheeks, feeling their warmth. This is simply a physiological reaction to the elixir, if you say so. Nick offered his arm. Come on, if we have to do this, let's at least have some fun with it. Fun is not the objective. It never is with you people. Nick, side one dinner, we smile, we nod. We make nice with the ambassador, and then we get back to work on the antidote deal reluctantly. Laurier placed her hand on his arm. The moment of contact sent a visible shiver through her, and her flush deepened. These enhanced sensations are most inconvenient, she murmured. Nick tried and failed not to feel a rush of male pride at her reaction to his mere touch. Think of it as a crash course in human-style emotional responses might give you some new research insights. The diplomatic dinner was every bit as awkward as Nick had expected. The Earth ambassador, a rotund, jovial man named Henderson, clearly found the situation amusing, while the Varian officials maintained icy formality that barely masked their disapproval. Leah sat rigidly beside Nick, flinching whenever their arms accidentally brushed. So Reyes Ambassador Henderson boomed across the table. I hear congratulations. Are in order. Never thought I'd see a human variant engagement during my tenure. It's not exactly a traditional engagement. Sir, Nick replied diplomatically. Nonsense, love finds a way, doesn't it? Lady Zappalia's face flushed dark purple. Our arrangement is based on cultural obligation, not emotional attachment. Of course, Henderson winked. Conspirator, cultural obligation. That's what all the kids are calling it these days. Nick bit back a laugh at Leah's mortified expression. Despite the awkwardness, he was enjoying himself. There was something satisfying about watching the stuffy Varian officials squirm with discomfort, and if he was being completely honest, the possessive glances from other males in the room, both human and Varian, when they looked at Leah's enhanced figure gave him a primitive thrill. This arrangement might be accidental, he thought, but I could definitely think of worse ways to spend my time on Vera Prime. The dinner mercifully concluded, but as they were leaving, Zor materialized at their side. The formal announce ceremony will be held tomorrow evening. He informed them coldly. What formal announcement? Nick asked. The public acknowledgement of your cultural binding. Thor's eyes narrowed. It is required by tradition. We're a little busy, trying to actually solve this problem. Nick objected. Tradition does not yield to convenience. Human after Z. Thord parted. Nick turned Arya. Is he serious? We have to do a whole ceremony about this. The binding announcement is significant in Varian culture, Leah admitted normally. It would be a joyous occasion with representatives from both families. Well, my family consists of exactly nobody, so that simplifies things on my end. Laria glanced at him, curiosity, overcoming her discomfort. You have no family. Orphaned at 6, grew up in the Luna colony system homes. Nick shrugged. Ancient history. Something flashed in Leah's eyes, a hint of genuine sympathy that she quickly concealed. I see. My condolences. Don't need him. Made me who I am today. Devastatingly, handsome, brilliant, and humble to a fault. Her lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Your humility is indeed your most prominent characteristic. Was that sarcasm? Lady Zia. Nick grinned. I'm corrupted, you already. The binding announcement ceremony was exactly the kind of formal, stilted affair Nick had expected. He stood beside Lyria on a raised platform in the Academy's Grand Hall, surrounded by Varian officials and a small contingent of Earth representatives. Leah wore another, hastily altered formal gown that did nothing to hide her new curves, and the whispers and stares from the assembled crowd made her flush. Continuously, Tavore presided over the ceremony, his expression suggesting he was announcing a funeral rather than an engagement. He droned on about sacred traditions and cultural responsibilities while Nick fought the urge to fidget. As decreed by Section 42 of the ancient Code Thalor, in 1, when an outsider physically alters a noble woman, they assume responsibility for her care and protection. Nicholas Reyes of Earth is thus bound to Lady Leah Zara until such time as the alteration is reversed, or until death severs the bond. Well, that's romantic, Nick thought sardonically. The human variant exchange program will continue. Under increased supervision, Thor continued while the bound couple seeks resolution to their situation. After the ceremony, Nick and Laria escaped to a small antechamber away from the prying eyes and whispers. Well, that was excruciating, Nick declared, loosening the collar of his formal uniform. Do we get a reception with cake, or is that too emotional for Varians? This is not a joke. Nick Leah Snap, using his first name for the first time. My reputation. My position in the academy. My family standing. All are in jeopardy because of this. Hey, Nick's tone softened. We'll fix this. The latest simulation looks promising. The compound should be ready for testing tomorrow. Laria nodded, but her posture remained tense. And if it fails, then we try again, Nick. Hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, being culturally bound to you isn't exactly a hardship from my perspective. Her eyes snapped. Two. What do you mean? I mean, you're brilliant, accomplished, and gorgeous with or without the, enhancements, Nick grinned. Plenty of guys would kill to be in my position. You find this situation agreeable? Disbelief colored her voice. I wouldn't have chosen these exact circumstances, Nick admitted. But spending time with you? Yeah, that part I don't mind at all. Leah stared at him, clearly struggling to process his honesty before she could respond. Thor entered the antechamber. Your public expressions of affection are required for the reception, he announced coldly. Public expressions of what now? Nick asked. It is expected that newly bound couples display appropriate physical contact. Thor's distaste was evident. Hand-holding would be sufficient after he left. Nick turned to Leah with raised eyebrows. Hand-holding, scandalous physical contact between nobles and commoners is traditionally forbidden except in binding situations, Leah explained, her cheeks flushing again, and with my enhanced sensitivity. Nick offered his hand with an exaggerated bow. Shall we scandalize the assembled masses, my lady? With visible trepidation, Laria placed her hand in his. The effect was immediate. She gasped softly, her eyes widening at the intensity of the sensation. You okay? Nick looked genuinely concerned despite the ego boost her reaction gave him. It's overwhelming, she admitted. Every nerve ending seems amplified. Nick gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Just focus on me. Ignore everyone else. Something in his tone made her look up. Their eyes meeting for a moment. The practiced formality in her expression melted away, revealing genuine vulnerability and something else that made Nick's heart rate quicken. Maybe this accidental engagement isn't the worst thing that could have happened, he thought as they returned to the reception, her hand warm and soft in his. The next day brought both breakthrough and disaster. Their latest compound successfully reversed the effects of the elixir and simulation, but as they prepared to synthesize it, the laboratory safety systems suddenly engaged, sealing them inside. Warning. Containment breach detected. The automated system announced emergency lockdown initiated. What the hell? Nick hurried to the control panel. There's no breach. The system's been tampered with. Leah joined him at the console. The lockdown protocol has been manually overridden. We cannot disengage it from inside. Who would? Nick stopped. Thor. That is a serious accusation, Lara said, but her tone lacked conviction. Come on, Laria. He's been looking for any excuse to sabotage us from the beginning. Perhaps she frowned. At the console, regardless, we are sealed in for the standard quarantine period. 12 hours, Nick sighed. Well, at least we can keep working on the antidote. As the hours passed, they worked side by side, occasionally brushing against each other in the confined space. Each contact sent visible shivers through Leah. Her composure increasingly difficult to maintain. You should rest, Nick suggested, after she fumbled a sample for the third time. You're exhausted. I am fine, she insisted, but her voice lacked its usual assurance. Nick placed his hands on her shoulders, turning her to face him. Talk to me. What's really going on? The direct contact, and his intense gaze broke through her remaining defenses. I can't control it, she whispered. The emotions, the sensations, they're overwhelming. The physical change is not. Just that. She looked away. The elixir has affected my neural patterns. The emotional discipline I've maintained since childhood is deteriorating. Nick's brow furrowed. What kind of discipline? Varian nobility. Undergo neurological conditioning from an early age. We learn to suppress emotional responses to prioritize duty and logic. of her person desires. Her hands trembled slightly without that conditioning. You're feeling things you weren't supposed to feel, Nick finished softly. She nodded, her eyes meeting his with startling directness. I have never experienced emotions with such intensity. It is frightening. Welcome to being human, Nick said with a gentle smile. We live in that intensity all the time. How do you function? How do you make rational decisions when your body betrays you at every turn? We don't always make rational decisions, Nick admitted. But sometimes, the irrational ones turn out to be the most important. They lapsed into silence, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Nick asked the question that had been bothering him. What was your childhood like growing up as Varian nobility? Luria considered for a moment, structured, demanding every moment, scheduled every action. Evaluated against the standards of our lineage sounds lonely. It was appropriate, she countered, but without conviction. What about fun, play, friends? Such things were considered distractions from our purpose. Leah's expression softened with memory, though. I did once create an unauthorized experiment growing crystal formations in my sleep chamber. My mother discovered it and got mad. She was disappointed. Ria said, the word carrying surprising weight. I never experimented outside the laboratory. Again, that's why you became a scientist. Nick realized, to have a legitimate outlet for your curiosity. Leah looked surprised, as if she'd never considered this perhaps in you. Why did you choose cybernetics when you grow up in the system? You learn to fix things yourself. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Nick shrugged. I was good with machines, got a scholarship to MIT Luna, and never looked back. You overcame significant obstacles. Leah observed didn't have much choice. It was that, or end up mining ice on Europa with the other colony orphans. A loud alarm suddenly blared through the lab, cutting their conversation short. The central processing unit erupted in sparks and smoke, began filling the chamber system. Failure. The computer announced fire suppression offline. Nick lunged for the emergency extinguisher, but a secondary explosion knocked him backward. He hit the floor hard, his vision blurring from the impact. Through the smoke, he saw a ceiling panel break loose directly above him before he could move. Leah's form appeared above him, shielding his body with her own. As the panel crashed down, it struck her shoulder with a sickening crack. But she didn't flinch, her body remaining firmly positioned to protect him when the smoke cleared and the emergency system finally engaged. Nick helped Leah to a sitting position, stunned by what she had done. You could have been seriously injured, he said, examining her shoulder. As could you, she replied simply. Why would you do that? Varian nobles don't risk themselves for commoners, especially not alien commoners. Leah met his gaze directly. Perhaps I am no longer functioning according to Varan. Noble parameters, the implications of her statement hung between them, interrupted only when the lab doors finally slid open to reveal Z. Thor in a security team. What happened? Zeeth Thor demanded, his eyes narrowing at their proximity. Equipment malfunction, Nick replied deliberately, omitting his suspicions. Convenient timing. Zor's expression remained impassive. The High Council convenes tomorrow to evaluate your progress. I suggest you prepare your report carefully. Human. The High Council chamber intimidated even Nick with its soaring crystal dome and 13 elevated seats arranged in a semicircle. Elaria stood beside him, her posture rigid. Despite the lingering pain from her injured shoulder, her physical changes remained obvious, despite the formal robes specially designed to minimize them. Pelori occupied the second chair, with Zor standing at his right hand. Their matching expressions of disdain made their alliance clear. We have reviewed your progress reports, the lore announced. They are insufficient. We've had some setbacks, Nick countered, but our latest formula shows promise in simulation. Simulations are not results. Zor interjected, and certain evidence has come to light that cast doubt on your intentions. Technician Reyes, he activated a holographic display showing laboratory records that had been obviously altered to suggest Nick had deliberately targeted the elixir for Varian consumption. This is fabricated, Laria protested. The original formula was clearly labeled for human physiology, only yet you consumed it, the lore noted, perhaps because you were encouraged to do so. That's ridiculous, Nick snapped. Why would I want this to happen to secure a cultural binding with a member of the High Council lineage South? Thor suggested smoothly, an ambitious move for a human of your limited standing. The council murmured clearly. Swayed by this interpretation, these accusations are baseless. Rhea declared, her voice stronger than Nick had ever heard it. Technician Reyes has worked tirelessly to reverse the effects your judgment is compromised, Nistelor said dismissively. The elixir has affected your emotional control effect. Evident to all present, as if to prove his point. Leah's cheeks flushed with anger. Hair-enhanced sensitivity to criticism. Obvious the council has reached its decision, Thalor continued. Technician Nicholas Reyes will be removed from the exchange program and deported to Earth immediately. And Lady Zia Nick, demanded. Zor's thin lips curved in what might have been satisfaction. Lady Zia will undergo the purification procedure to reverse both the physical and neurological effects of the contamination. Purification? Nick looked to Laria, whose face had gone pale. What is that? A complete neural reset, she whispered. It would remove all effect of the elixir, but also much of my recent memory and emotional development. It would make her a proper Varian noble once again. Sailor said coldly, You can't do this. Nick protested. That procedure could cause permanent damage. The decision is made. Talbot declared. Security will escort Technician Reyes to detention pending deportation. The purification procedure will be performed at dawn as the guards move to separate them. Nick caught Leah's eye for the first time since he'd known her. Her emotions were written plainly. On her face, fear, regret, and something deeper that made his chest tighten. This isn't over, he promised as they pulled him away. The last thing he saw before the council chamber's doors closed was Leah standing alone. Her violet skin pale with dread, her altered body a visible reminder of how a simple accident had changed everything between them. Nick paced the narrow confines of his detention cell at 8 steps forward, 8 steps back. The sterile white space offered nothing to focus on except his mounting frustration and the countdown clock on the wall, 44722, until his scheduled deportation. Damn it, he muttered, slamming his fist against the wall. The thought of Luria facing that purification procedure made his blood boil. He'd seen the fear. In here. Yes, whatever this procedure entailed, it wasn't just about reversing physical changes. They were going to rewire her brain, strip away the emotional awakening she'd experienced. The very idea made him sick. Over the past weeks he'd watched her transform from a cold, distant aristocrat into someone vibrant and alive. Yes, her enhanced figure had initially caught his attention. He was only human after all. But it was the woman emerging from behind that rigid Varian mask who had truly captivated him, and they're going to erase her like deleting a file they don't like. Nick had never been one for serious relationships. Life as an orphan had taught him to keep things casual to avoid attachments that could be taken away. But Leah, she was different. The way she'd thrown herself between him and danger in the lab. The vulnerability in her eyes when she spoke of her childhood. The flush that spread across her violet skin whenever he touched her. Those weren't things he could just walk away from. The cell door chimed, interrupting his thoughts. Nick tensed, ready for another round with Zor or the guards. But when the door slid open, he found himself facing a young Varian female he'd never seen before. She was clearly related to Laria, the same elegant features and silver hair, though her violet skin was a shade lighter, and her green eyes lacked the golden tint of Leah's. Unlike most Varian she'd encountered, she wore her silver hair in a simple style, and her clothing was less formal, almost rebellious. By Varian standards, you must be Nick Reyes, she said, glancing back over her shoulder before stepping inside, allowing the door to close behind her. And you are Kira? Zevthara, Leah's sister. She fixed him with an appraising look. I expected someone more imposing given the way you've thrown our entire societal structure into chaos. Nick couldn't help but grin. Sorry to disappoint. The chaos causing muscles are hidden under the uniform, to his surprise. Kira laughed, a sound he'd rarely heard from any Varian. I can see why my sister is risking everything for you. Risking everything? What do you mean? Kira's expression turned serious. Elaria has refused the purification procedure. She did what she told the council. She would not submit to neural recalibration. Kira's eyes gleamed with a mixture of concern and admiration. She said she would rather be exiled than return to emotional suppression. Nick felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by alarm. What did the council do? They've confined her to our family estate. until they can resolve her temporary mental instability. Kira made air quotes with her long violet fingers. Uncle Tavori is trying to invoke the family override protocol, which would allow him to authorize the procedure without her consent. That's, barbaric Nick growled. That's Varian tradition, Kira corrected bitterly. Why do you think I joined the cultural reform movement? There's a cultural reform movement, small but growing. Many younger Varians question the emotional conditioning, the rigid hierarchy theosolation. She pulled a small device from her pocket and placed it on the cell wall. It emitted a soft pulse and the surveillance indicator in the corner of the cell dimmed. We don't have much time. The security dampener only works for a few minutes, Nick straightened. You're here to get me out. I'm here because my sister's neurological scans show something the council is desperately trying to conceal. Kira said urgently. The elixir didn't just enhance her physically, it temporarily neutralized the genetic modifications that suppress emotional responses in Varian nobility. Wait, genetic modifications. You're saying Varian nobles are genetically engineered to not feel emotions. Not all emotions, just the intense ones, passion, desire.